Turns out, formula redemption. During the shortage. In 2022, something almost invisible happened to millions of American families. Parents stood in empty store aisles where formula used to be. They drove farther. They spent more time searching. They traveled outside their neighborhoods to feed their babies. And what researchers found when they looked at the data is that this wasn't random chaos. It was a measurable, traceable pattern of desperation. The real question is, who suffered most, and did anyone actually track it while it was happening? When the formula shortage hit America in 2022, it wasn't just inconvenient. It was terrifying for parents of infants who have exactly zero flexibility in their diet. You can't tell a 3-month-old to eat something different tomorrow. The shortage lasted months. Shelves stayed empty. Social media filled with parents trading tips on where to find formula, which stores got shipments on which days, whether driving 2 hours away was worth it. We all assumed it must have been chaotic and that some families suffered more than others. But we didn't have hard numbers. We didn't have proof of how behavior actually changed. That's where this research comes in. A team led by Dzubay at the University of Wisconsin and colleagues at Oregon Health and Science University decided to do something obvious but nobody else had done. They looked at the actual data. Real redemption records from real families in the WeSee program. They published this in 2026, years after the crisis ended, but the findings reveal exactly how ordinary people responded to extraordinary scarcity. Here's what they actually did. They grabbed 2 years of data from Oregon's Educ program. 17,435 households during the shortage months of January through July in 2022. Then they compared that to a control group of 16,766 households from the exact same months in 2021, before the shortage happened. Same time of year, same state, same program. Different conditions. They tracked everything. How many different formula products families bought, how many stores they visited, how far they had to travel, whether they left their home zip code entirely to find supplies, and whether they actually redeemed their full WIC formula benefits or had to settle for less. Think of it like tracking someone's grocery shopping GPS data during a normal week versus during a blizzard. The routes change. The time changes. The amount of gas matters suddenly. The results are honestly jarring. During the shortage, families bought significantly more formula products. That sounds obvious until you think about what it means. They weren't just buying one type of formula per trip. They were buying multiple types, multiple brands, multiple formulations, whatever was on the shelf. This is a hallmark of scarcity behavior. When you don't know when you'll find supplies again, you grab everything. The mean number of products purchased went up. The number of stores visited per household went up. Families weren't loyal to one store anymore. They became shopping nomads. And the distance traveled to stores increased substantially. We're not talking about an extra 5 minutes. We're talking about measurable increases in miles driven per week. Households with shopping outside their home zip code increased dramatically. Entire families were now crossing geographic boundaries they'd never crossed before, just to find formula for their babies. Here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. The percentage of formula quantity actually redeemed went down. This means families had WIC benefits they couldn't use. They had the money to buy formula. They had the authorization. But they couldn't find the specific formula they needed within reasonable distance or time. So they went home with less than they were entitled to. They were rationing, and the study found no consistent evidence that richer families fared better than poorer families, or that some racial groups weathered it better than others. The burden was widespread. The disruption was democratic in the worst possible way. Think about what this actually looks like in a person's life. You're a parent on WIC. You get formula vouchers for a specific brand your baby tolerates. You drive to your usual store on a Tuesday. Empty. You drive to another store. Empty. You drive to a store in the next town. Empty. You eventually find a brand that's in stock that your baby might tolerate, but it's not what you had planned. You buy it anyway. Next week you repeat this. Your gas budget explodes. Your time disappears. You're anxious constantly. That's what the data is showing. But here's where we need to be honest. This study can't tell us everything. It captured behavior during a crisis, but it doesn't explain why that behavior emerged. It doesn't tell us what parents actually felt. It doesn't reveal the behind-the-scenes negotiations families had to make. And it only looked at Oregon, so we don't know if other states saw the same patterns. The study is also cross-sectional descriptive research, which means it's excellent at showing what changed, but less powerful at explaining causation. There could be confounding factors we're not seeing in this snapshot. But here's what matters. This study proves that supply shocks don't just affect store shelves. They ripple through the actual lives of vulnerable families in measurable ways. They change behavior. They exhaust resources. And they do it to everyone, not just some groups. The bigger picture here is that WIC is one of the most studied, most protected, most well-intentioned assistance programs in America. It's designed to protect infants and young children specifically. And even within that program, during a crisis, families still couldn't access what they needed. That's not a failure of WIC, that's a failure of the supply chain itself. It raises questions nobody's properly answered yet. How resilient is our infant formula supply chain really? What happens if shortages last longer? What happens if they happen again but worse? And critically, why don't we have real-time tracking systems for essential goods like infant formula, so we can see where the gaps are forming before families are driving across state lines? This research is important because it transforms a scary news story into measurable social data. It stops being anecdotal and becomes undeniable. Parents didn't imagine their behavior changed. The numbers prove it did. Families didn't imagine they were traveling farther and shopping harder. The data confirms it. And that matters because once something's quantified, once it's in the research record, it becomes harder to ignore when the next crisis comes. The most striking thing about this study is how it shows that even in America's most protected nutrition assistance program, scarcity still finds its way to burden the most vulnerable. Turns out, scientists have been busy, and they're not done yet.